This episode of Unqualified Opinions is brought to you by Hirechain. Your next hire could come from anywhere: a recruiter, a job board, a referral network, or conference. Hirechain manages hundreds of candidate sources for you, so you only see relevant applications and can focus on picking the best person for your team. On average, our customers fill open roles faster and 30% cheaper than with traditional recruiters. Leading companies like The Graph and Messari already use Hirechain. So get your time back. Talk to Hirechain today and hire the best, fast. Visit hirechain.io/Messari for prioritized onboarding. This podcast is meant for informational purposes only and is not meant to serve as investment advice. Hosts and guests may hold cryptocurrencies discussed in this episode. Opinions expressed may not reflect the opinions of Messari.
In 2015, nearly every nation in the world adopted the Paris Agreement, a global treaty whose goal is to combat climate change. Specifically, the goal of the treaty was to keep the rise of the Earth's global surface temperature below 2 degrees Celsius. Doing this, by the group's estimation, would have a dramatic impact on avoiding irreversible damage to the world's climate. To reach that, the Paris Agreement focuses on reducing CO2 emissions, which are the biggest source of climate change. And almost 10 years on, a system of carbon credits has been developed to incentivize jurisdictions and their businesses to reduce CO2 emissions. To oversimplify, carbon credit systems are a hard cap on how much CO2 can be emitted in a certain period. And if an entity exceeds their limit, they must buy carbon credits from those entities who have emitted less than their limit. In theory, this system incentivizes groups to emit less CO2 than their limit. But in practice, carbon credit systems have run into major operational problems that have stalled their progress towards this opportunity, mostly driven by a lack of agreement and coordination between different jurisdictions. If you've been paying attention to the DePIN side of crypto recently, this type of problem is a familiar one. DePIN has been one of the most rapidly growing sectors of crypto over the last year, and its use case centers around coordination of distributed resources. So far, the largest DePIN projects have centered around tech infrastructure like wireless networks, cloud file storage, and compute. But a new project called Glow is adapting the model to tackle this global carbon credit problem by deploying solar farms. I'm not saying crypto can save the world, but maybe it can help. I'm Dylan Bane, and here's the story.
Messari's annual conference Mainnet returns this fall, September 30th through October 2nd. Now in its fourth year, Mainnet is the largest annual crypto event in New York, featuring leaders from crypto, Wall Street, and Washington. Join 3,000 attendees this year to hear from leaders like Kathy Wood, Hester Peirce, and Chris Dixon talk about what's in store for this year, 2025, and beyond. We'll cover the explosion of real-world assets on-chain, the industry's physical infrastructure, the codependent relationship of crypto and AI, the continued growth of smart contract platforms, acceleration of institutional products. We've got it all. Mainnet's your opportunity to meet hundreds of projects shaping the future of crypto and the institutional investors and capital allocators helping to fuel their development. You can enjoy a 20% discount using discount code MessariPod when registering at mainnet.events. Interested in a prominent presence at this year's Mainnet? Snag a meeting room or a booth and contact events at Messari.io to explore all Mainnet has to offer.
Hey, Dylan, thanks for coming on.
Of course, thanks for having me.
You wrote a report recently about a new project in DePIN, and specifically how a new project called Glow is trying to use DePIN principles to solve climate change. But we haven't actually talked about DePIN on this podcast quite yet, and so I want to take a step back and first talk about the how DePINs work and also the problems facing solar farms today. So let's start on the climate side. In your intro, you talked about the Paris Agreement and how progress towards reaching the goals of that agreement haven't quite materialized as fast as some hoped. Can you elaborate a little bit on what the roadblocks have been there, and specific to solar farms, how have those problems slowed the growth of deployment of solar farms?
Right. So I think there are multiple aspects to this problem. First is that nations can't figure out how to create like a carbon credit global system. So like the European Union has a different standard for what a carbon credit is and what the limit should be versus the United Nations guidelines versus like the United States, where only California has a formal cap and trade carbon credit system, and the rest of the market's just voluntary. Like basically, there's a coordination problem, and what this coordination problem leads to is like a lack of market infrastructure for carbon credits. So there's no rails to basically send carbon credits back and forth. There's no like clearinghouses, reconciliation processes. There's no accounting. There's no financing. There's no derivatives products. So there's just a very inefficient, fragmented carbon credit system, and this basically reduces the overall effectiveness of incentivizing the reduction of carbon or CO2 emissions. So where Glow comes in is that it tries to deploy solar farms. So why solar? Basically, solar is now the cheapest source of energy in the world, definitely the cheapest source of clean energy, and potentially cheaper than fossil fuels, oil, natural gas, etc. So most people don't really know this. That's because solar used to be really expensive. So in 2000, it cost $5 per watt to basically build and deploy a solar panel. Today, it costs as low as 25 cents. So now solar is the world's cheapest energy source. And because of that, it's the cheapest and most cost-effective potential carbon credits. Now, the big problem with solar carbon credits is that there's basically no system for it right now. And the issue is that in the past, any kind of carbon credit for deploying solar panels was basically rewarded to solar farms that would exist without the carbon credit. So these are farms that would have been economically viable, profitable, and would have been built without any other form of incentive. So what this basically did was create free handouts for these already profitable businesses and diverted capital and resources away from solar farms that would only be viable without a carbon credit. So basically, the real problem is there's no easy and reliable way to consistently tell if a solar farm needs a carbon credit to exist and be economically viable or if it does not need a carbon credit. And this has led to a lack of market demand for solar carbon credits, even though they would be the most cost-effective way to incentivize the reduction in global CO2 emissions.
Got it. And so then, in theory, if there was an easy way to be able to tell which farms did need to be subsidized, businesses who are still working towards limiting their CO2 emission, working their way down to their CO2 emission goal, could very easily help fund those farms that need the help while also contributing towards the broader requirements set by the Paris Agreement.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Got it. Okay. Folks who follow the DePIN space closely will probably pretty quickly be putting two and two together here and understanding how some of the DePIN models can help solve this problem. But for those who don't follow the DePIN space closely, can you walk us through at a high level how some of the largest and most successful DePIN projects are structured today, how they work, and maybe give an example of one or two projects that are particularly noteworthy?
Yeah. So for those who don't know much about DePIN, DePIN is basically a novel form of capital formation whose core thesis is that it's cheaper and faster to deploy infrastructure in a decentralized way using token incentives than in like a top-down, centrally managed way like a traditional company would be building and managing infrastructure. So the way I think about it is DePIN kind of uses free market capitalism and the invisible hand to incentivize the maximum amount of infrastructure possible, while most infrastructure today is kind of like a state planned bureaucracy. Everything's planned out, scoped out, and there's not direct infrastructure competition between deployers. Actually, the most successful DePIN project has been Bitcoin, interestingly enough. What Bitcoin does is it incentivizes miners to deploy physical mining infrastructure with no central planning. So what we've seen over the last 15 years or so is the most impressive deployment of infrastructure perhaps ever with Bitcoin. So it started as a handful of people operating mining rigs in their homes, has turned into ginormous corporations operating insanely sophisticated models to mine Bitcoin as efficiently as possible. And not a single dollar of CapEx has been spent on the Bitcoin protocol, outsourcing all costs to the miners. And this model is actually really simple. It's just a very large Bitcoin rewards pool with fixed inflation that can't be changed, permissionless access to compete to these rewards, so anyone can mine and get Bitcoin, and then you're rewarded proportionally to how much infrastructure you're providing to the network. So that's the simplest DePIN project, the first DePIN project, and the most successful DePIN project. What we've seen since then is a proliferation in new DePIN projects. We have Helium, which does decentralized Wi-Fi, so you basically can put up a hotspot and sell your excess wireless capacity to other people around you. We have Filecoin, which is a decentralized cloud storage provider. So they're basically a competitor to AWS and let you sell your excess computer resources to provide storage for people. And then we have other projects like HiveMapper, which basically pay you to take videos and pictures of roads and provide mapping data, and it's a competitor to like Google Maps. So these have all seen a lot of success. They've all deployed a ton of infrastructure. Their core constraints, they just haven't been very profitable so far.
So connect the dots into Glow for me in DePINs. Tell me how Glow is taking what some of these DePIN projects have done in the past and are applying it to these solar farms.
Right. So what Glow does is it basically uses its native token Glow to incentivize the construction and deployment of new solar farms. So at a very high level, you build a solar farm, through that you create carbon credits. Glow has a whole very sophisticated auditing process in place to make sure these are like high quality carbon credits that end buyers want. And then Glow rewards you with Glow tokens in exchange for basically creating these carbon credits from your solar farms. And what it does is it kind of models itself off the Bitcoin DePIN model and what the Glow founder calls foundational DePIN. So there's a big pile of Glow rewards. You can access it if you build a solar farm and provide solar carbon credits to the Glow protocol, and then you're rewarded proportionally, and anyone basically can get these. And it's a very simple model, but it's basically, and it just incentivizes solar farms that would come up that would not be viable without the Glow protocol to come up. And what's actually kind of neat about solar farms and solar panels is the cost of construction is upfront, and there's basically negligible ongoing costs. So once a solar farm joins Glow, they basically never leave, no matter what the token price of Glow is. So it's always going to be providing a baseline level of value to the token.
Got it. So most in the DePIN space generally, and this is certainly true for a lot of the projects that you mentioned before, the Heliums and the HiveMappers of the world, they tend to be demand constrained, which means that the hardest problem they have to solve is finding someone to pay US dollars for the product that they're offering. In Helium's case, that's wireless coverage. In HiveMapper's case, that's mapping data. Those projects are fairly. The incentive models are really very strong, and so it's fairly easy for them to get the supply side built up. As the demand side, they need to put a lot of work into. But what you read about in your piece is that Glow actually has the inverse problem, whereas the demand side from these carbon credits is actually quite clear. But it's incentivizing these solar farms to participate in the Glow protocol. That's proven to be the real challenge for Glow so far.
Yeah. So basically, because there's like very high growth in demand for carbon credits, It's going to be like a $2 to $3 trillion a year market by 2030. There's basically infinite demand at this point for high quality carbon credits. So as long as Glow creates a very robust auditing system that maintains trust, the demand is all there for Glow carbon credits. On the supply side, I'm not sure if I'd say it's constrained right now. It's more looking into the future. So right now, Glow is kind of artificially limiting the onboarding onto Glow just because it's a new protocol, and it wants to maintain stability and make sure its auditing system is robust. And the Glow rewards are very high right now. Now, in the long run, as Glow grows, the Glow rewards are going to decrease, and it's going to reach a stabilization point where we have to see if it can continue to incentivize large amounts of solar farms to be deployed at scale. So that's where Glow gets supply constrained. And that's the open question. Can Glow continue to provide enough rewards, incentivize new solar farms corresponding to like a sufficient level of carbon credits being sold to support the value of those Glow native tokens?
Got it. So let's go back to the original problem of the current carbon credit system and how the troubles with or maybe the inefficiencies with that incentive system. Specifically, how does Glow solve some of the key problems there? And maybe this is just a different way of asking the question: why does Glow's system need to be on chain?
Yeah, so I think that goes back to what I was talking about market infrastructure. So there's like no like settlement processor, there's no clearinghouses, there's no like derivatives, there's no financing that's robust for like current carbon credit markets and like a Web2 or like traditional financial infrastructure way. That's all built in on blockchain. Blockchains basically have all this core market infrastructure built in. So reconciliation, financing through DeFi, all kinds of derivative products already built in to blockchain. So nothing needs to be built. So you can just tokenize carbon credits and the whole market infrastructure is already there. And it's much easier to work across jurisdictions because no one controls a public blockchain ledger. So like in a centralized system, like nations would be like, why does this country have more influence over this global carbon credit market and system more than another nation? Whereas on blockchain, no one controls it. So jurisdictions can trust the system more. Then there's a lot of double counting problems in the traditional carbon credit system where people buy carbon credits, pretend to retire them. So they like used it, but they really just trade it. So like the carbon credit isn't used. That's very hard to do on a blockchain because everything is traceable, everything's very transparent. So that level of transparency isn't possible without a blockchain. The final part is basically DePIN. So it's hard to use token incentives on a Web2 system because one company or organization would have to issue all the tokens and everyone would have to trust this one organization. Whereas on blockchain, it's much easier to run a DePIN type incentive system, which deploys infrastructure much more efficiently.
Got it. So maybe to wrap us up here, we've been talking about Glow, specifically using a DePIN to tackle the problem of climate change. It's very possible, likely even, that we'll see other different Web3 solutions in the climate change, or even possibly specifically the solar farm space. What's the biggest problem? What's the next thing that you see evolving in this DePIN/climate change space? And what is the biggest sort of hurdle that projects working in that space are going to need to overcome to scale?
Yeah, so we're seeing an uptick in the decentralized energy subsector of DePIN. So a lot of this is kind of these things called like virtual power plants, where it's kind of rewarding people who already have solar panels or providing solar with various types of rewards. So they're kind of variations of the Glow protocol. I think what we're going to see is all kinds of new sorts of incentivization models for infrastructure that addresses climate change. So this could be incentivizing new wind turbines, incentivizing the deployment of EV charging stations, incentivizing more hydropower, and all sorts of new models. These DePINs are solving real problems and might prove to be crypto's most valuable use case yet.
Dylan, thanks.
This episode was produced by Steve Bichimer based on the report DePINs Glow Up, Incentivizing the Deployment of Solar Farms, written for Messari Enterprise by me in July 2024. To read more about Glow and other DePINs, please consider subscribing to Messari Pro at messari.io.